I've had a special request to introduce Mycroft. This is Mycroft, named after the older brother of Sherlock Holmes, who's very much wanting to go down. But this is Mycroft, and he's a bit fussed, and he just ate his dinner. So, in any case, now you've met Mycroft, and Hastings, who is a black cat, will be probably not too far away in the near future. So, this lecture that I'll be presenting now really is intended for people who've read the novel, or who've read at least the first 2 or 3 volumes of the novel Dream of the Red Chamber, Hongloumeng. And so it'll be a bit technical, and I presume that for those of you who are who have not read the novel, you may just maybe watch an episode of Star Trek or something else that maybe I date myself. But in any case, what I'd like to talk about then today is the issue of Nüwa, the mythical figure by Mycroft, the mythical figure who begins the novel. Of course, we know, for those of us who've read the novel, that she is the one who will repair the heavens and will have an extra stone, and that extra stone she'll set aside on Green Sickness Peak, and that stone will become, of course, the protagonist in the novel, really the kind of protagonist in the Bildungsroman motif of the novel Hongloumeng. So, just by way of sort of chatting about her and what she means in the novel, I'll be looking at my notes a lot so that I don't go too far adrift and have tangents. So the first thing I want to point out is that there are varying points of view in the novel Hongloumeng. We have the point of view of each of the characters in the novel, of Jia Baoyu, of Lin Dayu, of Bao Chai, of Aroma, the maid, grandmother Jia, Granny Liu. All of these characters have their own point of view. And then, of course, there's the point of view of the reader, who is those of us who read the novel. And then, of course, the point of view of the author, setting aside Michel Foucault's notion that there is no author, there is only the reader. And then there is the point of view, and this is the sort of the area that I want to talk about today. That is the point of view of the narrator, who is not a person in the novel, nor is the narrator the author himself. The narrator in the novel is really a third person narrator who has a third person point of view of the events that are transpiring in the novel. And also the narrator, we know, is of course really the author. And at the end of the day, the person speaking is the author himself, who is Cao Shui-qin. But the author, Cao Shui-qin, is going to play with the reader because he is going to, in a way, discuss himself. So he will be a third person narrator discussing himself, the author, in the third person. And we find this if you look at page 51 in volume 1 of David Hawkes' translation, which is the translation that I use when I teach this book. But you have this interesting reality in the novel, and that is let me read to you the passage on page 51, my rather haggard volume of Cao Shui-qin's Hongloumeng, translated by David Hawkes. So here's what the text says on page 51. As a consequence of all this, veritas, starting off in the void, which is truth, came to the contemplation of form, which is illusion, and from form engendered passion, and by communicating passion entered again into form, and from form awoke to the void, which is truth. He therefore changed his name from Vanitas to Brother Amor, or the passionate monk, because he had approached truth by way of passion, and changed the title of the book from The Story of the Stone to The Tale of Brother Amor. Old Ko Mei-shi from the homeland of Confucius called the book a mirror for the romantic. Wu Yufeng called it a dream of golden days. Cao Shui-qin, in his nostalgia studio, worked on it for 10 years, in the course of which he rewrote it no less than 5 times, dividing it into chapters, composing the chapter headings, renaming it The 12 Beauties of Jingling, and adding an introductory quatrain. Red Inkstone restored the original title when he recopied the book and added his second set of annotations to it. This then is a true account of how the story of the stone came to be written. Pages full of idle words, penned with hot and bitter tears, all men call the author fool, none his secret message hears. So, in essence, the novel itself begins with a kind of conflation. It confuses the distinction between the author and the narrator, which is part of the purpose of the novel itself, right? To question the polarities of true and false, of good and bad, and all of these things, which is very much a Taoist and a Buddhist way of constructing reality and describing reality. So this conflation of points of view, right? The idea that the novel has multiple points of view, this really is the larger schema, in a way, of Cao Shui-qin's Hongloumeng, or Shitouji, and which conflates numerous things, right? So what's conflated in the novel? One is myth and reality, they're conflated. Dream and awake time are also conflated. True and false are conflated. And so this brings us to the idea of Nüwa, the mythical sister or consort of Fuxi, this sort of prehistorical mythological figure in China's historical texts. Nüwa, who is really the mythical figure who begins the novel itself, she is usually depicted as a being with a woman's face and a snake's body or a snake's tail. You can see this in various Han Dynasty depictions and Zhou Dynasty depictions in early Chinese archaeological sites and frescoes and the like. In Eastern Han accounts, Nüwa is described as a kind of creator. She creates aristocrats from the yellow earth and commoners from mud. In Han iconography, she's depicted with a builder's compass. So she's a builder, right? Which is what we see in the Qing Dynasty novel, Nüwa as a builder. During the Han Dynasty, she's depicted as the wife of Fuxi, who creates. But by the Tang, she becomes Fuxi's sister and his wife at the same time. Also in the Tang Dynasty, she's no longer a primary creator. So her how she's described throughout Chinese history sort of transmogrifies through time. But in the novel, she's depicted in her role as repairer of the sky. Right? The compass she is shown with in Han art are reminiscent of her role as a repairer of the damaged cosmos. So there's this ancient Chinese idea that the cosmos is damaged in some way, and so she saves the world from extinction by essentially repairing it. In the novel Hongloumeng, she repairs it with stones. Perhaps alluding to the ultimate intention of the book, Cao Shui-qin, as he's sort of the 18th century version of Nüwa himself, right? He is in the novel, in a way, repairing or giving structure, imposing a structure, or deconstructing a structure to the cosmos. Now, early myths record a time when the so-called 4 poles, the 4 poles or the 4 cardinal directions. Actually, in China, there are 5 cardinal directions: north, south, east, and west, and center. But these 4 poles have collapsed, and the earthly supports holding up the sky give way. So in the novel, she's seen as repairing this collapse by making a support with magic stones. And the stone that is unused to repair the cosmos in the novel is, in fact, the stone that will be incarnate as Jia Baoyu in this wealthy household in the capital. So Nüwa is half woman and half snake. She's paired with her brother. She's paired with her husband, Fuxi. She is part of this Taoist idea of polarity. For those of you who've studied or read the Tao Te Ching, an early Taoist text that begins with Dao Ke Dao Fei Chang Dao Ming Ke Ming Fei Chang Ming, the way that can be weighed is not the constant way, and the name that can be named is not the constant name. So, i.e., that is that the Tao being two polar, I almost want to say opposites, but that doesn't quite work. But in any case, two polar realities. Everything exists in polarity. There are two dimensions of everything. There's light and dark. There's health and sickness. There's life and death. So she really symbolizes this Taoist belief in the ultimate polarity of all things. She's a woman, so she's yin, right, as opposed to yang. Yin would be Nüwa, yang. She's feminine. Yang would be her husband or her brother, Fuxi, who is male. Yin would be a woman, and yang would be a snake. Snakes can sometimes be yin also, but in this case, I think yang is a snake. So this idea of Nüwa, this is kind of a crucial thing. The novel is beginning with a being that represents polarity. So what do we make of this, right? It's the coexistence of opposites, right? So I was mentioning that the novel itself plays with the coexistence of opposites. So she herself represents the coexistence of opposites, the coexistence of dream and reality, the coexistence of false and falseness. You'll see that, the truth and falseness, right? False or falseness juxtaposed with truth. So Zhen, true, and Jia, false. You have two Baoyus in the novel. The protagonist in the novel, Jia Baoyu, and someone who is his doppelganger, his polar other, his opposite in a way. That would be Zhen Baoyu. And their names, maybe I'll return to this, their names represent this interplay between truth and false, right? So the other things I want to mention is, we sort of continue talking about, is the novel's idea of conflating real and unreal, and conflating real and unreal into the idea of the dream. So if you look at the novel itself, right, Hongloumeng, Red Chamber Dream, the notion of dreams will reappear throughout the narrative, this very, very long novel. So for those of you who might be looking at this for the first time, this is the translation of the Chinese novel, and this is a modern reprint of the novel itself in its original Chinese. So the idea is this idea that I want to confront is the idea of verisimilitude and allegory. Verisimilitude and allegory are conflated in several ways in the early chapters of the novel. For some of you who might be watching this, especially some students that I've had the privilege of teaching face-to-face, which is indeed a great privilege, one of the things that you've noticed, if you've read the very first chapters of the novel, is very much this interplay between what seems like real life and then this sudden entrance into a dream landscape. So this happens quite a lot in the early chapters and actually throughout. But after the account told in the fairy precincts, right, we are ushered briefly into the real world, just long enough to be removed again. So any reader of the novel Hongloumeng will encounter supernatural events, and you sort of feel like you're in this fantasy, but then suddenly you're dreaming, or you're removed from the dream and you return to the very diurnal daily activities of life itself. So, for example, in pages 51 to 52, you meet someone by the name of Zhen Yin. He's introduced, and then we're taken into his dream. in chapter 5, Jia Baoyu will be taken again into another dream. So the novel also uses names to suggest alternate meanings. So a name that sounds like one thing will function as a homophone to suggest something else. So let me give you a couple of examples. For those of you who've read this novel a lot, especially in Chinese, this will be common knowledge to you. But names have hidden associations. So for example, we'll have someone by the name of Zhen Shiyin. And Zhen Shiyin, Zhen being a surname, sounds like a different character. So a completely different Chinese character. And Zhen Shiyin as a name sounds like, with different characters, of course, Zhen Shiyin, which means something like true events are hidden. That is this very Buddhist idea that the reality around us somehow seems vaguely masked from our ability to perceive it accurately. And then you have Zhen Shiyin's friend. He has a friend by the name of Jia Yucun, and the name Jia Yucun, the characters are quite different, but the homophone Jia Yucun sounds like fictional words are there, right? So untrue words are actually there. So you have truth and fiction juxtaposed with one another. Now, one good example of the conflation or the interaction of or between truth and false, or false and truth, Jia and Zhen, Jia meaning false, Zhen meaning true, is in the dream in chapter 5. It's really one of the marvelous chapters in the novel, and could have been perhaps itself, the dream sequence in chapter 5 could have been actually a play that was written by Cao Shuqin, who was known to have been a playwright and a painter and a calligrapher and a drunkard. Now, so here Baoyu is taught the truth in his dream, but he doesn't get it. Right? So that's the key of the dream sequence. If you've read chapter 5 and reread it a few times, it's quite marvelous. He's in a dream, and the purpose of the dream really is to convey reality to him, but it just doesn't sink in with him, right? Page 125 notes that this is an interesting thing, right? Juxtaposing obvious statements to what is actually true. Page 125 in volume 1, you hear this statement that nothing, quote, worth recording happened, right? Well, whenever you read in Chinese literature, especially in Cao Shuqin's Hongloumeng, whenever you hear this, nothing worth recording happened, this is a sure sign to pay attention, right? Whenever you're said, don't pay attention to this, pay close attention, so something significant will happen. Cousin Zhen's wife, Youshi, invites grandmother Jia, Lady Xing, and Lady Wang to a flower viewing party in All Scents Garden. Now, all scents garden, like scent, to smell, right? Now, one of the powerful ideas in especially Chinese Buddhism, what we call Chan in Japan, we can say Zen Buddhism, is that the senses deceive us. The senses fool us. So Jia Baoyu goes for a flower viewing party in All Scents Garden. This is a sign that something here is going to carry with it a Buddhist theme, that our senses are somehow really fooling us. Well, he gets tired from over-drinking wine, and Qin Shi, who is Jia Rong's wife, she of course will die later, takes him to the inner rooms to take a nap. So he's going to take a nap. And then, there's a passage, if you have the novel with you, page 126 to 127 is definitely worth reading. And then starting on page 127, Baoyu starts to have what Hawkes translates as the dream of golden days. He hears a song, a warning about the folly of what Hawkes translates as love's pain, right? The folly of love's pain. And he meets the singer, Fairy Disenchantment. She discloses her business. Her business is the affairs of love in the dust-stained human world. Well, we had a bit of a glitch. someone apparently phoned, and while the call was coming in, part of my lecture was erased. It is now in the fairy precincts of the fairy disenchantment, and hopefully there will be a time when we can all recover that part of my lecture. I was talking about, I believe, the idea of red dust and this fairly beautiful Buddhist idea of being careful that our attachments to things such as recorded videos are not such that we lament them when they're gone. So now that I have my jacket off, let me provide some concluding remarks about this topic of Nüwa and polarity in the novel. So again, we're talking about fairy disenchantment, who offers Bao Yu an entertainment, the dream of golden days. So there's a dream within a dream, and he follows her in this dream into the land of illusion. So he dreams, and then he enters into a kind of play about a dream. But within this dream, he goes into a land of illusion, and he reads the main register of Jinling, the 12 beauties of. So he's going to read about the futures of these 12 beautiful girls that he knows in the mansion that he lives within. So he basically, the chapter 5, this play, this dream sequence, essentially discloses the futures of the 12 beautiful girls in his life, and he hears the song, the Dream of Golden Days, and in this dream at the very end, fairy disenchantment gives to Jia Bao Yu her little sister, and her name is Ke Qing, from Ke Yi, the Ke, and Se Qing, Qing Se, the Qing, which is means passion, right? So she can impassion you. That's what her name means. And she's also called 2 in 1, which is the girl that Bao Yu is given in the end of his dream is a mixture, an admixture of Lin Dayu and Xue Bao Chai. And the fairy disenchantment then gives him instructions with her little sister, who she is now married to. He gives him instructions in the, quote, art of love, right? So he learns how to be intimate with, to be intimate with her, have sex with her, and then he wakes up. Not after a rather dramatic moment where he's taken to the Fort of Terror. So the whole idea, right? The whole idea of this dream is to enlighten him, to tell him the truth, and at the very end to introduce him to the pleasures of sexuality, but also to inform him that lust is a dangerous thing. And the real problem is that he doesn't quite get that, because what happens then is he wakes up and he's supposed to be enlightened and understand that lust will get him into trouble and cause him to have passions and desires that will function like red dust. He doesn't get it. The first thing he does is he calls to him his maid Aroma, and then he enjoys the arts of love that he had just learned in the dream with her. So the ultimate reality of his dream is not heeded throughout the entire novel. The whole dream ends up being essentially a waste in the novel. But let me just end here with a couple of examples of polarity within the narrative that really kind of play with this Buddhist and mostly this Taoist trope of yin and yang, of two polar sides. The first is on page 140 in the dream sequence. You see that Jia Bao Yu is told about the mistaken marriage of Bao Chai, gold. She represents gold, and Dayu, who represents jade. This mistaken marriage will happen. He's going to marry one of them, but it's going to be a mistake. And Bao Chai and Dayu represent these two complementary aspects of the ideal woman. So Dai Yu will represent an ideal woman in one way, and Bao Chai will represent, so Dai Yu is one ideal and Bao Chai is the other ideal. So both physically and in form and in the forms of personality, right? So physically you have Lin Dai Yu. She is compared to the famous Western Han beauty who was very slender and graceful. Her name was Zhao Feiyan. But Zhao Feiyan was also not only slender and beautiful and graceful, but she was also very cunning, and you can see Lin Dayu's personality being a reflection of Zhao Feiyan's personality. And then Xue Baochai, the other woman that Jia Baoyu will end up falling in love with, she is an echo to Yang Guifei, the famous Tang concubine of the Tang Emperor Tang Xuanzong. She was very corpulent, but she was also very pragmatic. So you have this idea of the slender and cunning woman, Lin Daiyu, and then this more fleshy but pragmatic woman that would be Xue Baochai. And then you have this ideal, this ideal in terms of personality. Daiyu will be she will represent the ideal of passion, of Qing, and Baoyu will represent the ideal of pragmatism, of being very grounded. Well, there you have it. That is the basic structure that we see happening from the very beginning of the novel with Nüwa, who represents this mythical woman, who represents yin and yang, who represents polar opposites that are in interplay and also that are in some senses a kind of antagonism. And then you will see that theme carried through the novel and very much represented in chapter 5. So, in keeping with my tradition here, I shall pour just a little of this. And so, 祝你们身体健康. I wish you all very good health. 不知有何来世，且听下回分解. If you want to know what happens next, then you'll have to wait until the next lecture. Ganbei. Cheers.